I just jumped into plant-based. I didn't know, and I'm thinking, well, what do I got to lose? If it doesn't work, I can just go back to doing what the heck I was doing. I'm still alive. So then I started noticing, I started feeling better. I had more energy. I wasn't taking as much insulin, and my A1C went down. In 2007, I uh, I used to hang wallpaper professionally, and I used to kickbox every day after work for 45 minutes. And I started having a little intermittent discomfort in my abdomen area. So I didn't know exactly what was going on. So I thought, well, maybe it was my gallbladder. And so I would eat different kinds of food, but nothing like changed the intermittent discomfort. And so I wasn't really too concerned about it. And then I started having a little intermittent pain in my lower back. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to cut back on my kickboxing a little bit. So I cut back on my kickboxing a little bit, but then I got concerned because I was fatigued all the time and I couldn't understand why I was so fatigued. And then one evening when I was sleeping, I woke up and I had a real sharp pain right below my breastbone area. So I thought, well, I better go to my primary care physician. So I went to her and I told her I thought it was my gallbladder. And, she pressed in those areas and I didn't jump off the table or anything. And so she said, I'm going to have you do a bunch of blood work and I want you to do a sonogram. And I'm like, okay. So I had that done. They would have never found anything on my blood work. All my blood work was perfect. Nothing was elevated. But then when they did my ultrasound, my mass was right in the center of my pancreas. It was all contained there. And at that time, nothing was mentioned. So I got a phone call as to say that she wanted me to do a CT scan with and without contrast. And she needed to have that done before she left to go out of town on Friday because I guess she was taking some additional training or something. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, just send it to the place where I had my other exam because you'll have the results in about an hour. So I went to do that, and that's when they found out exactly what it was. So, but no one said anything to me. Nothing was mentioned about cancer as of this time. So he reviewed a couple more things. He explained everything, and I think still at that time it was just like so surreal, or just you're numb because you don't comprehend everything. We went to surgery, and I had a total Whipple done where they removed my entire pancreas, my spleen, my gallbladder. I have 2/3 of my stomach, and I have part of my small intestines was removed. In the meantime, while I was in the hospital, was my very first encounter with an endocrinologist. I didn't know anything about being a diabetic. I never knew what an A1C was. He never did blood work. He almost killed me because he had too much insulin going in my body. And he half the time didn't even know how much insulin I was getting because he would do things over the phone and never write stuff in my file. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of crazy. So then I changed endocrinologists. I went to my second endocrinologist. And at that time, I was doing shots. I didn't know anything about pumps. And this endocrinologist was a type 1 diabetic, and he had a pump. Still, never blood work done. I think he might have done a finger prick. I still didn't know what an A1C was. So I kind of kept researching, and I called over at Moffitt because I knew a doctor over there that did most of the EUSs. He was the main one over there, Jason. So I asked him, Jason, I know I'm not the only pancreatic cancer person that doesn't have a pancreas. Who are you sending your diabetics to? So he gave me a list. I called, and the doctor I went to was Dr. O'Malley, and he was wonderful. He did blood work and he did A1Cs. However, that was when I got introduced to my pump. And then However, but if you're like within the range, the normal range, even if you're at the low end of the range, you're okay with him. And I'm like, something doesn't sound right. Because my A1C at the time was like kind of in the middle sevens. And I'm like, well, I think that's still kind of high. And I still didn't really know what all this stuff was. And so I worked with him and he retired. And then a Dr. Koshi came in and that's who I saw. And he was great, but it was kind of like the same kind of practice. Um, Nothing was really described, about changing the way that you ate. And I really didn't know a whole lot about plant based at that time, though I read a little bit, but I was still trying to figure out all this stuff about being a diabetic because that was a whole new arena for me. I Googled, and that's how I found Dr. Patel. And he is an oil free, whole food, plant based endocrinologist. So he really started monitoring all my stuff. And I kind of understood a little bit more about my A1C and that. And then I think my second or third visit with him is when I met the diabetes educator that came to shadow him. And that's how I found out about mastering diabetes. And Jacinda worked with me tremendously. And and so then I just jumped into plant-based. I didn't know, and I'm thinking, well, what do I got to lose? If it doesn't work, I can just go back to doing what the heck I was doing. I'm still alive. So then I started noticing I started feeling better. I had more energy. I wasn't taking as much insulin, and and my A1C went down. So I'm like down like to 7, almost at like 6.9. And I didn't realize that, but they said that's kind of like almost like you're not like a diabetic. I said, well, could you tell my body that because I don't have any organs? And so that's where I'm at. And I didn't tell anyone that I was going plant based because I didn't want to hear all their nonsense. So in the meantime, through all that, like I dropped 35 pounds, and that was a bonus. And I'm like, whoa, that was like there was no effort put in that. It just like happened. I guess I just kind of kept asking questions. Even when I was in chemo, I kept asking about nutrition. Oh, don't worry about it. You can eat what you want. And I'm like, something's not right here because there's got to be more to this situation. And I went to it was a type 1 and a type 2 seminar. It was some guru that came from California. He was supposed to be some big endocrinologist, and he had a workshop. So three of us went. And in the breaks, I went up and talked with him and, kind of basically shared a little bit of my story. And it was kind of strange to me because no one wanted to talk to me. No one wanted to know about what I'm going through. I kind of felt like I was just left out there. I was like floundering, trying to find out what was best for me. And and then at the time, I was a caregiver to my mom and my brother, and I was a POA to a neighbor. So I didn't really have a lot of time to devote to myself because, you're too busy taking care of everyone else. And so when my mom and my brother passed away, I still only had my neighbor that I was concerned about. I thought, okay, now it's all about me. And I didn't mean that in a selfish way, but now I got to really get a hold of my own health. And um, and so I read a little bit about plant based, and I'm like, oh, this isn't too difficult. Doesn't seem very difficult. So I started with breakfast at first. And I'm like, oh, this is easy. I can do breakfast. And then I did lunch. And I'm like, oh, I had breakfast and lunch. And I'm like, okay. So the next day I did breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I'm like, ooh, well, this is easy. What's so darn difficult about this? Still didn't really know what I was doing. And I was kind of crashing a lot because I didn't really need that much insulin, but I didn't know all that at the time. And then it wasn't until I went to meet Dr. Patel, and then when I met Jacinda, and then that's when I got introduced to mastering diabetes. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to read all this. And I read some of this and I'm like, wow, this is still kind of foreign because they're talking about reversing type 2. I don't have type 2, but both of them are type 1s. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm just going to read a little bit more. And then I'm going to follow a little bit more. And if I screw up, I screw up. It's the only way I'm going to learn of what's out there. And so I just kind of kept following that more and more. And then I got switched on my pump. So I went from a Medtronics to the Omnipod, which was a life changing situation to me because I didn't have an umbilical cord, and I could hide it in my clothes much better. And uh, we could set up different settings that really helped a lot more and could really zoom in on how much insulin I needed to take and how much I didn't need to take. And trust me, I'm human. I still mess up. But that's just part of the situation. But really what makes me, I think, the most upset is I know some people that are type 2. I just watch the way they eat and they so abuse like their insulin or whatever. And I'm like, you guys just flip and piss me off. I'm like, and they're looking at me like, why? I'm like, because you can change all this. You have that choice. It's what you're putting on the end of your fork. And that I said, I don't have that option. I don't have any organs anymore. So why wouldn't you take better care of your health instead of abusing and that? And so one individual that I know is already losing part of her eyesight. And I'm like, that's because of your A1C is so high and you don't have your diabetes under control. So why wouldn't you do some changing instead of eating all this fat laden food and mac and cheese and hamburgers and all that? But they think it's difficult. And I'm like, well, you guys make it more difficult. I said, I can eat the same thing every day. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I have more strength. I I have I have more energy. And I know I drive people crazy because I was hyper, but I think sometimes I even get more hyper at times, but that's okay. They have to deal with that. And that, I go and work out. I do Pilates. I go to the gym. I ride my bike. Uh, it's like a whole new life. And I mean, I'm 70 years old. I just turned 70. And people go, there is no way that you're 70. And I'm like, yeah, it is. I was born in 1953. I really am 70 years old. So, and I look at some people that are like in their 50s and I'm like, wow, they look awful old to me. But I think it has to do with because I don't have all that junk in my body anymore. I always tell people, why don't you try it for 6 weeks? In 6 weeks, you can tell a difference. So, and in 6 weeks, if you don't see any benefit, then you can go back to your crap way of eating. So why don't you try a few things? I'm not telling you to throw the baby out with the bathwater right at start like what I did. I just like, yeah, let's just jump in. Why don't you try maybe doing a lunch and a dinner or a breakfast and a lunch? See how your body feels with that. Do that for a few days. And then try to go to 3 meals a day. And then do that for a while and see how your body does. And then don't make it difficult. Make salads, put some beans on it. Do your beans and greens. And I found out for me that I do like overnight oats and I put spinach in my bowl and then I dump my oats on it and then I put my fruit on it. And they're like spinach and I'm like, yeah. I'm like, for some reason my blood sugars just stabilize. And then when I do beans and greens, I do a little apple cider vinegar on it and it like kind of stabilizes my blood sugars. And trust me, I add all kinds of stuff to it. I put tomatoes on top, red onions, I put sprouts, and it's enjoyable. So it's always kind of interesting. I love it when people go, "Oh, but you're kind of difficult to go out to dinner with." I'm like, "What do you mean difficult to go out to dinner with?" I'm like, "I can eat all the stuff that you pretty much eat. I just don't do milk. I don't do dairy or I don't do any kind of meats." And I'm not apprehensive. I'll check the menu before I go to out to dinner with someone. And a lot of times I've called the restaurant to see if they can do some modification. And most restaurants will do that for you. And you kind of learn which ones you can and can't go to. And I've brought stuff with me. I've brought beans with me. I bought fruit to dump on top of salads. And I've brought my own dressing with me. And I said, I'm not embarrassed to do that. I have to do it for me and what's good for my health. It's not for anyone else's benefit, it's for my benefit. In 2007, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Probably like most people, I didn't know what pancreatic cancer was. I didn't know how severe it was. I didn't know that a survival rate was 5% and that most people are not, only 10% of us are eligible to have a Whipple. That is the type of surgery that is involved when you have pancreatic cancer. So a lot of times, some people only have the tail of their pancreas removed. Some people only have the head of their pancreas removed. Not everyone becomes a diabetic. However, for me, because my mass was totally encapsulated in the center of my pancreas, when they had removed my tumor, I had already become a diabetic. So the little portion of the pancreas that I had left was of no value to me. So that was completely removed. So I was totally dependent on insulin. So I went in for one thing of getting cancer removed, and I came out as a type 1 diabetic, which was totally foreign to me. It was, the whole situation was very surreal to me. And that was another learning curve, just figuring out what I needed to do to survive. Just kind of getting the basis down of knowing how much insulin that I needed to take, because at that time I was doing shots. So I was doing 4 shots a day. I was doing fast acting with every one of my meals. And then at night, I had to take a long acting to take me through the night sleeping until I woke up the next morning. And that's how I did that for, I don't know, I would probably say maybe 4 or 5 years of my survivorship. And then when I got on a pump, then that got regulated a little bit more, and I only had to do 1 insulin, and that was in my pump. I didn't know anything about a CGM. No one ever talked to me about that. And I think I probably wouldn't have been real open to that at the time, because I'm like, I don't want another apparatus on my body. I'm like tired of this stuff. And then it wasn't until I got with Dr. Patel and found out and got more information and got a better handle on what diabetes was all about, is when we went on a CGM. And actually, my diabetes educator said, if you do not put a CGM on, you are coming to live at my house until you decide you're going to wear a CGM. And I'm like, okay, we'll get a CGM. And so that's how that happened. That's been a whole life-changing experience too, because that gives you better control. You can see where your blood sugar is going all the time, even before you're eating or anything else. Even to this day, even though I'm a 16-year survivor, it's still very surreal, because there's at times that I don't feel that I went through cancer. I'm reminded every time I eat that I have to do insulin, or that you're changing your pump or your CGM. I would also tell people not to be apprehensive as to try something new. It's like, what do you have to lose? Wouldn't you want to have a better life? Wouldn't you want to have your health to be optimized to the best that you possibly can? So, if like, try it for 6 weeks. Try it, read the book of Mastering Diabetes, see what it's all about. I think one of the biggest things was that I did use that. Yeah, the decision tree. I knew it was a tree. That was another big decision. It's work at first till you fully understand more about it, but it kind of narrows down and gives you a better handle on where your diabetes is and for your health. And And sometimes I still go back to that and look at that. But once that you understand what works good for you and what doesn't, like I notice, like if I eat like rice or some pastas, that will spike my blood sugar up more so than other foods, even though they're still good carbs. And I noticed that certain fruits will spike my sugar up more, like doing mangoes or papayas, or sometimes melons or pineapple. So you just kind of have to learn how to adjust with that. And then like berries are the prime for me. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, things like that, strawberries. I think the thing is, at first, I know that's a lot of times that, and I know how I am for myself. I know that sometimes that we put our heels in and we just dig ourselves in, and we're we're resistant to try to do something new. It's like, oh gosh, I got to learn something new again. And but once that you get past that fear or that hesitation, it's like smooth sailing, to a certain extent. I mean, you're always having to make sure that your blood sugars are in line and that you can't do crazy things, because we are human, by all means. And it's still a little difficult sometimes to get your carb ratio correct, because I'm not the typical type 1 diabetic. Like I could eat, and I'll just give an example. I could eat beans, greens, fruits for lunch. I could eat the very same meal the very next day, and my body metabolizes it totally different. It handles it totally different, and you give the same amount of insulin. But don't be afraid of that, because your blood sugars will adjust, and that, like later on, after 3 hours, well, I check at 2 hours to see where I'm at, and then at 4 hours maybe I might need to make a little correction, and I do that. So it's just trial and error. But don't be afraid to try it. What do you got to lose?